Hello, my name is Heidi Jensen Warren, and I am a mother and a New Zealand trained teacher. I have worked in education in Australia and in New Zealand over the years, and my youngest son is still at primary school, and he has special needs, and he has a learning disability, disabilities, I should say. It's been a long journey as a parent who has had neuronormative children and unfortunately has had to weather the storm of um, being the whānau or family of a student who has learning disabilities and significant needs, and sort of putting on my teacher and my mother hat, um, and walking in both those shoes to see the horrible deficit in New Zealand, um, that is called inclusion. I see it as a deficit model. I don't see it as a model that has worked. And there are thousands of parents across the country and thousands of people who are family members of a student with learning needs and a disability, that know that in the inclusion model in New Zealand is an epic failure, that undermines the rights of the disabled learner to a first world adequate and effective education. Inclusion is a model that has not worked. So a little bit about my background. I am a citizen of both New Zealand and Australia, but New Zealand is the country of my birth. I have spent formative years both in Australia and New Zealand. I have undergone tertiary education in both New Zealand and Australia. I have teaching experience in both New Zealand and Australia. And I've been a parent in both countries throughout my last 27 years. I have seen the evolution of two systems. So the Tomorrow Schools model in New Zealand, which is a joke, and basically in Queensland, Australia, the retention of the separate special needs schooling system. So in Queensland, Australia, for what I know, is they did try and they do have a bit of inclusion still in schools where they'll put a child with special needs into a mainstream environment. But the difference between our countries of New Zealand and Australia is that, from what I know, definitely in Queensland, they still effectively fund services and wraparound support for disabled students. It's probably not perfect, but it's a great deal better than what they have in New Zealand. But they also have special needs schools, separate special needs schools in Australia and within Queensland. From what I know, recently, or over this year, I discovered that my youngest boy, who is disabled, has significant learning challenges, and who is also neurodiverse. He, as a New Zealander, can get into a full-time special needs school in Australia, in Queensland, to be precise. And in New Zealand, my son cannot get into a special needs school. And in New Zealand, my son cannot get full-time support within his mainstream school or classroom. And in New Zealand, the school that my son goes to has to fight tooth and nail to get consistent funding to support some, and I'll say that word, some of my boys' learning needs and, within the school. So the future for my son in New Zealand, within the schooling system, looks very challenging. And it's a fear that any parent would have, is if you had a choice, knowing that one system he could go into as a New Zealander in another country is significantly better, and provides far more support and understanding and specialized teaching for him, versus what is offered here. It's heartbreaking. It's mind-boggling, that another country can offer far more to my son and pay to offer that support far more than his own country. I mean, it's disgraceful. It's diabolical. Now people have said to me, well, it's because New Zealand's a poor country. New Zealand isn't a poor country. I have heard that New Zealand actually has less debt than Australia. I could be wrong, but I don't think that's the case. I think it's a societal issue, because if people value things like inclusive education and people actually value the rights of the disabled child and the disabled learner and the disabled person, right, then they would uphold a system that actually meets the needs of the disabled learner. They would invest in a system that actually meets the needs of the disabled learner. They would campaign for a system that actually meets the needs of disabled children and the disabled learner. So, I'm just here to say, come on, New Zealand. This story needs to be shared. I think people in New Zealand in general need to know that we are really failing to uphold the rights of the disabled learner and disabled children and disabled students. We're failing epically, and we're failing families, we're failing schools, we're failing communities by not rallying for a better system. And I'm not talking about, hey, 20 years in the future things will get better. I'm talking about now. Why aren't we on a mass hikoi to Parliament now? Why aren't we working together as communities, communities of parents, communities of teachers, communities of learners, to actually build a system from scratch that meets the needs of the disabled learner and upholds the rights of the disabled student? Why aren't we doing that? One thing I would congratulate the ACT Party and David Seymour for is by bringing back charter schools. Because why I would support charter schools is because we can see how mainstream education in this country is failing to meet the needs of learners, whether they're disabled or they're not disabled. It's failing to meet the needs of so many learners. So why don't a whole lot of us get together and actually build a charter school? And I put my hand up and say, please build it in Canterbury or the Selwyn district, because the Selwyn district's the fastest growing region in the country. A charter school that's only for students with learning disabilities, learning challenges, and who need specialized teaching support and specialized facilities. Now, people out there will be like, well, there's Waitaha, there's schools like that. Yes, but they can only meet the needs of a very small percentage of students. There are students with Oars funding that cannot get into places like Waitaha or Allendale, because they're very small and they can only cater for a small number of students. We all know that in this country, to get Oars funding, which is lifelong, is extremely difficult. The criteria to meet Oars funding is so, well, I would compare it to going through the eye of a needle. It's very, very constrictive and it's very reductive. There are principals who roll their eyes when you say, well, can my student get Oars funding? Because they know that hours and hours of them writing up the paperwork for the student is likely to be met with a big fat no from the Ministry of Education. So there are so many kids in this country that have been epically failed by the system, and this system of Oars funding is just nonsensical, because there are kids with intellectual disabilities, significant other learning disabilities, even syndromes, who do not meet the requirements for Oars funding. So I think we need to scrap all this. We just need to scrap it. We need to build schools that have an open door policy. If you have a diagnosed disability, then and you have significant learning challenges, then you should be able to get in straight away, without the emotional, draining, horrific toll that is, the applications for Oars funding. We need to actually support parents. We need to support school communities, and we need to support, most of all, students in our country to have a learning journey that is successful, to have a learning journey that meets their needs. And by that, you're going to have to build schools and facilities that adequately, effectively meet the needs of the learner. So, who wants to be part of this journey? Just jump on board, because we can't just wait any longer. We can't hope things are going to change. Politicians are going to change nothing. It's going to take parents right now to build something for our kids, and to build something for our kids now, and to build something for our children of tomorrow, and to ensure that the rights of the disabled child are actually met in this country, and that New Zealand pulls itself out of the dim, dark ages and actually starts respecting people with disabilities.